Good morning, Tri-Cities. It's 9 o'clock on Friday. I'm Carl and welcome to Coffee with Carls this morning. We've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. I am excited to welcome our very distinguished guests for this morning's theme on resiliency in the Tri-Cities. My predecessor, Carl Adrian. Carl, welcome.
Carl, good to see you.
Good to see you too. And you are working remotely this morning. I think, did you want to get out of the smoke or visiting family?
Yes, we're visiting family in Iowa, so.
It's awesome. Thanks for coming on this morning. And also Gary Petersen. Gary, former VP of Federal Programs for TRIDEC. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning.
Thanks
Carl,
for joining us.
I have to ask the first question.
Yeah.
The lead-in music to this morning was big band music. Was that in favor of, was that for Gary?
You know, I actually asked Tracy that question and I was like, I think this predates both of our guests. What are we?
Certainly predates me.
Yeah, the name of the song, I think I've heard that song before. I think that was part of the lyrics. I think that's where she was going with it. And or I think we're going to talk about the B reactor. So maybe it was kind of a big band World War II flashback. Yeah. But yeah, today we're going to talk about a little bit of history of the Tri-Cities and the TRIDEC and the resiliency that our community's been through in the past. And you guys are going to have, I know, some great stories. So I'm looking forward to the time this morning. As always, we start off with talking about coffee or coffee cups. And so, well, I have my WSU gear on for Gary, and I have my Tri-Cities airport mug for Carl. I didn't have an Iowa Hawkeye, so I figured the airport was maybe a second best to kind of, you know, give tribute to you guys this morning. So let's start with Gary. What do you got for coffee or mug?
Well, I already finished 2 cups of coffee, so I'm a little bit slow this morning. And if I bring the coffee cup in, my dogs will come in right behind it. So,
okay.
I'm shy on coffee this morning.
All right. And Carl, what about your coffee?
I've already had coffee. It's 11 o'clock here, but I do have a mug full of lemonade. And in Iowa, you do as the Iowans do. My alma mater, Iowa Hawkeyes, go Hawks. You know, and this fits well because I also root for another Hawk, the Seahawks. So it's easy.
That's perfect. I think we were all surprised that even Bill Belichick thinks that Russell Wilson is the best quarterback in the NFL. Well, let's get started. Maybe both you guys, for anybody watching today, you know, that doesn't.
I think we've gone into a pause.
Yeah, I've got you, Gary, but.
Yeah.
Okay, Carl, you're back, I think.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I popped off and then I might have had a little glitch. Can you see me okay? Carl, I can't see you or Gary.
Yeah, you're breaking up.
Okay. May have some bandwidth issues. Carl, I may have to turn the con over to you.
Well, we've never talked before, Carl and I. I mean, we're kind of shy.
That's right. Huh. Yeah, my bandwidth's good. Am I still kind of chopping up?
Yeah.
Well, if you can hear me, why don't we start with introductions. Gary, can you give us a little introduction of who you are, like maybe where you grew up and, you know, how did you come to the Tri-Cities?
No, I'd be happy to. I'm an Omak native. I graduated from Omak High School up near the Canadian border very long time ago. Spent some time in Korea in the military, and the military taught me that I needed to go back to school and get an education, so I went to WSU, great school. Purely by accident, on a Friday morning in 1965, I had a job with Ford Motor Company back in Detroit, all lined up, but I wasn't excited about it. And my advisor said, hey, there's a new company called Battelle opening in the Tri-Cities, and why don't you at least give them a call? So I hopped in my car, drove to the Tri-Cities. I'd never been here before. Well, I'd been here before in the Army, but that's a different story. And talked to Battelle on Friday and went to work on Monday, and I've been here since 1965. Wow. So retirement doesn't hold for me, but I've worked with Battelle, for Westinghouse, for Washington Public Power Supply System, whoops, and TRIDEC and Battelle. So I'm just a long time Tri-Citian now.
Well, that's great. And Carl, what about you? Obviously, you're in Iowa now. We got the Iowa Hawkeyes mug, but what's your backstory and how did you come to Tri-Cities?
So I grew up in Omaha, so not far. And after graduating from the University of Iowa, I went to work over in the Quad Cities. And I always used to joke that if the Tri-Cities decided to head West Richland to Quad, I had a lot of good marketing ideas for that. And then in economic development, spent some time in Wyoming, then back in Iowa. And kind of like you, I was recruited to the Tri-Cities by a headhunter. And that was in 2003.
2003. Oh, that's great. You know, talking about the headhunter and, you know, going through the selection process, the first interview that I had back in December, we had breakfast together, Carl, and I remember you told me that there was a book that kind of talked about the history of TRIDEC and about this guy, Sam Volpin Test, which, you know, I bought the Kindle version and started reading it and started learning some of the history. And I think I talked to somebody else, might've been Bob Ferguson once, and he goes, well, don't believe everything you read. But I think, you know, obviously Sam Volpin Test, and that book's a great tribute, great book by Mark Smith about the history of TRIDEC. But, you know, let's start off with Sam Volpin Test, and maybe, you know, both of you guys could share some stories of your time with Sam, because I think in a lot of ways, you know, he represented the community and TRIDEC. But maybe Gary, since you've spent more time with him, you want to kick that one off? You got any Sam Volpin Test stories?
Is Gary frozen? Both of you guys are frozen for me. Hello?
Hey, so Carl,
Yes.
I'll hop on as a co-host today. Sorry for the issues. So how, I guess, you know, as Carl was talking about, a little bit of stories about Sam Volpin Test, and you had the privilege of at least working a little bit with Sam.
Sure.
Can you share some stories?
Yeah, well, Sam, you know, when I came in 2003, Sam had quit traveling to DC because he was kind of a fixture in DC. And the stories were that even though he wouldn't make appointments, he expected to see the congressional member themselves, and he would sit in somebody's office for, you know, a couple hours waiting until they would see him. And generally they would see him. You know, he had made, I think, a lot of powerful friends in Seattle as he was growing up. As a business person in the Tri-Cities, became better connected with a variety of influential politicians, and recognized in the early 1960s with a few others that Hanford was important and the community needed to support Hanford. But if Hanford went away, the community and his interests, selfishly as well as others, would be hurt. So they created TRIDEC, basically as a volunteer organization. When I came in 2003, as I said, he had quit traveling, but spent a lot of time on his phone. And he could call, pick up the phone, and get Patty Murray on the phone, or any of the members that he dealt with on a regular basis. I always thought it was funny. He had a computer on his credenza, but he certainly didn't know how to use it. But it was for appearance, I think, at the time. And, you know, I'll just say Sam was kind of old school, if you will. He was a bit gruff at times, but at his age, he could say things and get away with them that most of us couldn't. It was kind of a unique experience for me to be in the office. And I will say that I think Sam and I got along very, very well together. And that's perhaps hadn't been always the case with the TRIDEC president. And so, you know, we just had a really good relationship and joked a lot together. And, you know, we used to say we thought his social security number was 001 kind of thing. But, you know, he was an amazing guy and really sharp. I mean, just really knew his stuff, I'll say right up to the very end.
So I lost contact there for a little bit. You must be talking about Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to share some stories, Gary?
So I'll share a little bit. Sam was one of the first people I met when I came to work in 1965. Battelle assigned me to help write a newsletter for what was called TRIDEC at the time, and that was Sam Volpin Test. And Sam actually, you know, I met him and I thought he was old then. Well, now I'm older than he was when I met him, so he wasn't that old. But Sam was an individual who didn't want to ask anybody for any. I mean, he would set his own schedule, his own priorities, and he didn't want to ask permission of a board or anybody else. That was Sam. Give you an example. Actually, Sam ended up hiring me when he was 99 years old into TRIDEC, and Carl didn't find out that I was an employee working for him for maybe 6 months or so. I mean, it wasn't until Sam finally said, "Hey, Gary needs an office in the TRIDEC building," that I think Carl finally knew that I was one of the employees. But you know, that's the history behind Sam. So Sam fought for the Tri-Cities though from, I mean, it's been over 55 years. And Sam always believed in the Tri-Cities, always believed there was something else, but he took the approach you needed congressional support. And he had very strong congressional support in both Magnuson and Senators Magnuson and Jackson.
Oh, you bet. And I think that's, you know, Carl, with your extensive economic development background, you might agree that I think TRIDEC's pretty unique in, you know, that federal advocacy role within the sphere of TRIDEC. Do you know of any other, you know, economic development agencies that maybe are as active, you know, on the federal side?
I don't, but I think, you know, I think if you looked around the country and looked at those organizations that were serving communities with big federal presence, whether it be military bases or others, they would typically be more active than the normal organization. Yeah. And, you know, I don't know of any others that are as active as TRIDEC. I'm not sure, I'm not ready to say that we were the most active, but well, I think TRIDEC did have a reputation among many members of Congress, and not just the Washington delegation, that we were active. And just a footnote on Gary, I think I knew Gary was an employee when he came begging for a raise and wanted enough hours so he could get benefits.
Well, let me just say it was a pittance. Right. So let me just add to what Carl just said, though. We have had other energy communities that are under Department of Energy. I mean, whether it's Oak Ridge or Savannah River, I mean, or Idaho Falls, all have tried to replicate what TRIDEC is. I mean, they recognize that TRIDEC continues to have a very excellent reputation with congressional offices. And Carl Adrian's right. It's not just with our Washington delegation. We knew pretty well the delegations from each of the DOE sites and others. I mean,
and I'll go back and say, of the energy community alliance communities, I think we do have the strongest presence. We are the best in that regard.
Let me just add one other thing, and that is over roughly 15 years or so, the success of TRIDEC in Congress has been rather amazing. Because I don't know what the total number is now, but I'd be willing to bet it's more than $1.5 billion of funding that has been attracted to the Hanford cleanup and the Pacific Northwest National Lab because of TRIDEC's involvement with congressional offices. I mean, it's a direct one-to-one relationship. So success story is really good.
No, you bet. That's a great. This is great. So sorry about dropping off. I don't know what happened with my bandwidth, but you guys really don't need me. You could have this conversation for an hour, and I appreciate that.
The Tri-Cities need you. The Tri-Cities need TRIDEC.
Well, I think coming from Idaho, I did have some connections at Idaho National Lab, and I've had some conversations since coming to TRIDEC, and I totally agree from their perspective. I think there's, I want to say like jealousy, but there's a professional understanding that they wish that they had an organization like TRIDEC that was connected to so many areas of the community, along with the congressional connections as well. And I think in the Energy Communities Alliance meetings that I've partaken with, which is a nationwide organization of, Department of Energy related communities at the sites you guys mentioned, it seems like a lot of the other leadership in that group comes from the public side. And I think that's another unique thing about TRIDEC, is that we're really this marriage of public and private, which economic development agencies across the country follow different models, obviously, but I think it speaks of the strength of our organization, and going back to the history and then what we can do in the future, and on our theme today about being resilient, how can we pull these parts of the community together for this common cause that we're working on. But how about resiliency? And maybe, I don't know, Gary, you want to kick it off as you've been here a little longer than Carl, but
so I'm happy to. Every
not
time,
going back to the big band era, but
every time that the community has faced a real downturn, I mean, when Washington Public Power Supply System was building 5 reactors all at the same time, in a matter of roughly 3 weeks, we laid off 10,000 people in this community when they stopped construction of 2 of the reactors. And at the same time, followed very closely behind by a shutting of production, and the production out of Hanford. N reactor was put on pause and so on. So there was a whole sequence, and there was a lot of joking, just like in Seattle, whoever leaves last, turn out the lights. But this community has bounced back time and time again from those kind of downturns. And it's because of the people. Carl Adrian pointed it out right. I think that the people here just don't give up, period. And there's a difference today, and I will say that I think TRIDEC is more needed now than they have been since that downturn back in the, that was in 1980s, because at that time we had a very strong publisher of the Tri-City Herald. And so not only was there TRIDEC, but you had a voice in the community supported by the publisher of the paper. Today, we don't have that same thing. And so TRIDEC becomes what I'll call the singular voice with congressional offices, with the governor's office and others, to try and make sure that we bridge this particular period of time with COVID, with smoke outside, all of the things that seem to be against us.
Oh, you bet.
Carl, maybe just a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
One, maybe before Gary's conversation, but I think TRIDEC has been successful for a couple different reasons. Obviously, because of the people that have worked at TRIDEC, starting with Sam, but right through today. You've got a great staff there. But I think it's also been community support, because I think TRIDEC is probably better funded than some of those other organizations that are in those other energy communities. And, yes, we have had the support of both the private and the public sector that's allowed TRIDEC to do some things. But it's also the fact that the community leadership sits at the TRIDEC board table. The TRIDEC board is probably the biggest collection of CEOs, particularly from large companies in the community, that exists in the Tri-Cities. And so the combination of funding, the combination of leadership from the board level, and then the excellent staff have all made that a success for TRIDEC. The other thing I'm going to pick up on that Gary mentioned is I do think that the resiliency has a lot to do with the people. There was an agrarian community here prior to Hanford, and they worked the land, they worked hard, long days, they you know, sweated a lot out on the Hanford site. The people that came to build B Reactor and the Hanford project were from all over the country, but they had that same work ethic. And I think that's carried through to today, that we just have, you know, a lot of people with a lot of great character and a good work ethic. And if they get knocked down, they get up and move forward again.
I support Carl with one other idea, and that is many of the ECA, the Communities Alliance supporters, they were surprised to hear how few staff members TRIDEC has. I mean, there's a belief among some that it's a big organization, 20, 30 people. Well, I don't have to tell you that, you know, you can count on two hands the number of employees TRIDEC has. So the employees also make TRIDEC what it is.
You bet. And I think, and, you know, I appreciate both of you guys talking about it, because we do have a good team, and that's, you know, been such a, you know, even with COVID and working from home and everything, like, I can't say enough great things about our team, you know, working together and helping me kind of transition into this job and, you know, do my best to pick up where Carl left off. But I think that that's a good point, Gary, is that, you know, we are this public-private funding model, but we're also, you know, more of a private company. We are lean and mean. You know, we don't take like a government, and nothing against government, but we don't take a government approach to staffing and, you know, how we do stuff. We're very much, you know, I'd say pretty entrepreneurial, kind of a startup, you know, lean mentality, which I think talks about our culture, you know, and we at TRIDEC are trying to represent this great community that you guys are doing a good job of describing, you know, to be resilient. And I think, you know, one of the things that we're doing right now, and even, you know, appreciate Tracy jumping in there. I know she didn't expect it, but, you know, Tracy has, you know, shifted her role from working on attracting companies, which we're still doing. I'm trying to, you know, pick up where she left off, but she's heading up our CARES grant program. So we're getting these dollars from the feds to the state to the counties and West Richland also, and, you know, working on putting that out to small businesses to support them, to give them some cash to bridge this gap. So we're trying to be resilient and nimble, I guess, and, you know, it kind of fits the theme that we're talking about today in the Tri-Cities for sure.
I think that's a perfect example of the value of a small, very fleet of foot staff, and you've got it.
No, it's great.
I might just say a couple other things. You know, while the community is facing what I'd consider a crisis right now with the COVID pandemic, you know, in the last couple decades, even though the community really hadn't faced a crisis, it was able to come together on major issues, whether they be legislative and others. And I think one of the best examples was the getting the 4-year authority at WSU Tri-Cities. You know, the first year, and I can't remember the years now, which years those were, but the first year that was in the legislature, several of the other campuses got 4-year authority. Tri-Cities did not. Some of that was because of some mixed messages the community was sending, as well as WSU was sending. And so TRIDEC stepped up and created a committee on higher education with community leaders involved and all sectors of the community, and made a concerted push to get the legislature to, I'll say, reverse the decision they'd made the year earlier. And we did get that 4-year authority, but I think that's a perfect example of how the community has come together. And I can think of some other legislative issues, state legislative issues over the last few years that have been similar. The other thing I'll say is, until now, if you look back over the last, I'm going to say close to 20 years, there's only been 5 or 6 years in the Tri-Cities where employment has actually declined. I mean, it's been on a steady rise for pretty much 2 decades. And I think people get complacent about that. The economy's always been good. So why do I have to worry about it? And so I think, you know, it's more important now for the community to be supporting organizations like TRIDEC and not be complacent, even though they may themselves be hurting.
That's a great point.
So I'll jump right behind what Carl said.
Yeah.
You know, one of the reasons that TRIDEC has been successful is it's not just the individuals. Carl Adrian points it out right. We TRIDEC have always managed to team with other individuals, whether it's in the communities and broad communities, not just Richland, not just Kennewick, not just Pasco, but the broad community. But in addition to that, and I'll use the national park as being an example, it was not TRIDEC that necessarily led the effort for the National Historical Park B-reactor and so on. It was a combination of 26 individuals in all of the locations, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, here, even support from Savannah River, that worked together to get that accomplished. And so one of the things that TRIDEC has been very successful at is using those teams to get the four-year college campus at WSU, one example. I mean, we also help support the new medical school that WSU has in Spokane. So it's teaming with others to get things done. It's not just the individuals in TRIDEC, but they lead the effort most of the time.
That's a great point. And it's great because we're talking about team, and I'm getting messages from our team and everybody's very appreciative that even though you both are retired from your positions, you still talk about we and our team and TRIDEC, and that's the way we feel about both you guys. And I think that's a great example of what we're talking about is like, you're still on the team. You might not be getting a paycheck, but we still share this history and this bond to our community. So
I'm not sure that Carl ever did give me that raise.
So maybe you're still earning now what you did before.
Yeah, that's about right. But the team is really important, and the community support. I mean, we've had it in spades, and it's not always easy because what is good for one of the communities should be good for the entire community. But it's not always easy to strike that balance.
No, for sure. I think, Gary, you talked about the 80s when, the whoops construction was ended, and then maybe end reactor was paused. But how did the recovery go? Like, what was that story through that period? How did the Tri-Cities come together to come back? And you mentioned Tri-City Herald as being that voice, but what was that story? How did the Tri-Cities make it?
Let me describe just one event. When the decision was being made by the Supply System Board and WPPS to terminate 2 projects and stop 2 others, the community itself came together. There was a gathering of people out at what is now the Energy Northwest headquarters building. 10,000 people. Every school in the Tri-Cities shut down, and they had a march out to that building. They had yellow ribbons on all of the trees. I mean, it's that kind of, I can't imagine today shutting down all of the schools except for COVID. I can't imagine coming together in that fashion. But right behind those shutdowns, end reactor slowed down. And there was also a major program called BWIP, Basalt Waste Isolation Project, which was designed to look at deep boreholes in Gable Mountain for depositing waste. That was shut down too. So it was a combination. It was just not one thing. It was 2 or 3. Oh. In between, I got to give Sam credit because he loved to do this. He went after a thing called LEGO. And I can only do it once. Sam can only do it once. Laser Interferometry Gravitational Wave Observatory. And Sam used to love to go to Congress and say, I want, and then he'd spell out that whole thing, and look, he got it. And it's, it may be small in staffing, but it's major scientific achievement. So it's those kind of things that bridge the gap that make it into something special.
Oh, that's a great point. Carl, how about how did the Tri-Cities fare in the last recession, the 2007, 2008? You talked about that last 20 years and not really seeing a decline in employment, but how was it here during that time period? Was there some slowdowns?
It really wasn't an impact here. You know, and I think historically the Tri-City economy has been counter-cyclical, but particularly in that last recession, I don't think the community missed a beat. Now, I will tell you why, is because Benton County received one of the largest amounts of the ARA funding, stimulus funding, of any county in the United States. And Gary, help me, but it was almost $3 billion.
Almost $3 billion over about a year and a half investment.
Yeah, and so there was an increase in employment over that period, and one of the 5 or 6 years that we had a decline was, I think, about 2009, when those dollars went away, because there had been a bunch of temporary hires at the time, and some were, again, let go. The contractors called it a rebalancing of the workforce, but it was a downsizing to some degree. But again, we didn't miss a beat. The housing market didn't miss a beat. The economy was strong.
Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of a different story than, most of the Pacific Northwest went through in that time period. I know I was in North Idaho, and, it was the first time since the 80s that all the sawmills, which were a major employer up there, went away. Construction and real estate totally went away, because there was so much in other markets, in housing markets, there was so much speculative buying, based on kind of this fake money, because of the derivatives and everything, that those things just collapsed. And it wasn't a immediate shutdown like COVID. It was kind of a more gradual, but it came on pretty fast. In 6 to 9 months, a lot of stuff was shutting down. And so again, I think that even talks about the resiliency of the economy, and TRIDEC and the community's role in this federal relationship, that those federal dollars obviously, kept things pumping around here and didn't see that same effect.
So and even though we did have a decline in 2009, I think we were back in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So
let me just mention too, though, we had the National Lab is a major cornerstone. It always has been, and the community has supported the National Lab consistently, but it's had steady growth and in major accomplishments. Energy Northwest has been producing power that is less than 5.5 cents a kilowatt hour. We've had companies that have been spun off from Hanford Technology, whether it's Tylite, I don't know the name of Tylite today, but I mean, there's a number of companies that have become consistent producers in this community. And we should be thankful for all of that. Small businesses in the local community have been mainstay, and some of them are starting to hurt a little now because the prime contracts haven't come the way that they should have. And so some of the subcontracting for Hanford hasn't been as consistent as it should be. And so we need to support those businesses and continue to do so we find new uses for Hanford, energy parks, all of those kind of things.
Oh, that's a great point. What's next? I had some notes, but you guys have just kind of been running the whole show, so maybe I should just open it up. Where do you guys think we should go next?
Well, I just hope that you and David have as much success and as much fun as Carl Adrian and I did going, pounding on doors in Washington, D.C. Let me just mention a side note, and I hope Carl jumps in with this. Many other companies team together to go to Washington, D.C. in big groups. And our success has always been having 2 individuals, maybe 3, go and have quiet, very directed conversations with our congressional offices and their staff. I mean, our biggest success has been being able to do this quietly, directly. And Carl, I think you'd probably jump in on some of that too. I mean, it's been that relationship, but not a total, 20 people showing up to pound on a door.
Well, I think, and I have been in other communities where they'll do an annual trip to Washington and 25 people, or, I think GSI, for example, in Spokane, they take a big crowd of people and stuff, but there's, the message is so diverse. Somebody wants to talk to housing and urban development. Somebody else wants to talk to labor. Somebody else wants to talk to Defense Department. And so the message gets diluted. And I think as Gary points out, one of the successes that TRIDEC has been the fact that we have been focused. The message has been pretty consistent. And yes, we have asked for things from other federal agencies occasionally and that sort of thing, but the focus has been pretty much on Department of Energy and programs that are of interest to PNNL. And again, I think that's made us more successful than some of those other communities.
Let me just point out, Carl, that I don't know of another organization or community organization that writes an annual congressional letter that is very specific.
I agree.
It is detailed. It talks about each account, funding account. I mean, it has become something that the congressional staffers actually use extensively. I mean, but I don't know of another company or community that does that. TRIDEC is the only one. And it's a powerful tool. I mean, you put in writing and you stand behind it and you say, these are the things that we want. It's also a surprise because on occasion, we haven't always supported full funding for some of the programs. I mean, we've done a balancing act over the years that says where the money is needed is here, not necessarily there. And so that hasn't always made a couple of our members happy, but in total, it's worked with the congressional staff.
You bet. Well, I mean, I'll just say, again, being the very new guy here, it's just amazing, the effect of those federal dollars on our economy. And obviously that's always been one of TRIDEC's missions, is to diversify the economy. And we'll always be committed to that goal. As we work towards that diversification, we just have to make sure that the mix of jobs is at the same salary level as those federal jobs, as it applies to Hanford contractors and it comes down, because, the reality of it is that the federal jobs, including PNNL and contractor subcontractors, I think represents about 11% of our total workforce in people, but it represents like 23% of the dollars from the workforce. And that's because of the pay scale that goes on out there. So, as we bring in new companies, we always have to have that in mind. Carl Adrian, you're really the expert on this. Maybe you can talk a little bit about it. Making sure that we're working to try to attract those as much as we can, those higher paying jobs to, diversify along those wage lines.
So let me also mention, it comes as a surprise to some, even in the Energy Communities Alliance. TRIDEC has never been about just continuing federal funding. We have always supported trying to get Hanford cleaned up. And the earlier we can get it cleaned up, the better, so you can move on for other activities on the Hanford site. I mean, the national park is just waiting to open the doors so you can get people to go out there and see it, not just 10,000 or 13,000, but 200,000 people. So it's never been about just continuing the federal funding. It's been about, let's get it cleaned up, let's move to other things. Carl Adrian?
Yeah, Carl, I'd also say, I guess, that, I'm with you that you obviously want to attract companies that are paying family wage jobs or as high wage jobs as you can. But, not everybody in the Tri-City workforce has a PhD or has a rad tech degree and that sort of thing. And so, I think the idea that you've got to attract jobs that for everybody, that give everybody an opportunity. And so, I think that's why food processing is one of those targets that you've used, is because it maybe isn't the Hanford wages, but it's still a good family wage job. And it obviously impacts the agricultural community, the Tri-Cities as well.
It does, and I think too, a good point to bring out right along those lines, Carl, is that, the size of our workforce and the fact that we have WSU Tri-Cities and we have CBC and we have these other higher education and training institutions here locally is the size of our workforce. There's a lot of upskill potential. So somebody that might have a job, you know, starting out in food processing or an ag industry has a chance to go back, get training and certified to move up, you know, within their own company or onto that next job. And I think just the fact that we've got the mass of that workforce is a huge advantage for all the companies that we'd attract, for sure. Yeah.
So far we've kind of focused a little bit on Hanford and the lab, but I think too that the community at large needs to know that TRIDEC has supported a wide variety of other activities. The Columbia River Treaty, the Snake River dams, now working with Mid-Columbia Energy Initiative to say, what is our next energy source? Supporting the energy storage that studies that the lab is doing. I mean, it isn't just Hanford cleanup. It is the broad base. I mean, the food processing industry, Carl Adrian has said many times, you know, that's a base. That's a base that is going to stay as long as people eat. And so we need those kind of things in the community as well.
That's a great point. You know, even with COVID, food processing and agriculture were essential industries. So they didn't slow down, you know, they kept on working. And that base is, you know, what's going to sustain us through this period for sure.
Right.
And I think that's a good point, Gary. I was thinking, it happened before I got here, but I think, you know, there has been some local rallies around the Lower Snake River dams, maybe not to the point of 10,000 people marching out to the Energy Northwest headquarters, but
pretty good size.
Yeah, pretty good size rally. And so I think, you know, we've still got that cohesiveness that we can apply collectively with all our partners on these issues that come up and show how much Tri-Cities is behind, you know, what's going on.
So also you have, I think, almost total support of both of our senators and our representative. I mean, I just don't know of many cases where we've ever not had that support from Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, and Dan Newhouse. I mean, and prior to that, Doc Hastings. I mean, we've just had tremendous support on the part of our congressional delegation. And it includes others too. I mean, the representatives from across the state have supported us as well. So it's good.
No, you bet. I think that's a great point. Along those lines, you know, with the federal delegation, something that we're still actively pursuing and looking forward to moving, you know, forward on is the nearshore reconveyance, you know, and being able to come up with kind of a different methodology there and kind of make a change in some of those ownerships of from the core to our locals. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about that a little bit, but it's, you know, it's a process that's still going on. We're still working hard on it. I do want to give a shout out to David Replog. So he's our current Vice President of you know, our public federal policy side, and he's doing a great job. I really love working with David. I wanted to make sure we brought his name up on our team because he's heading up this nearshore reconveyance. But you guys want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
David will do well until he turns maybe 80, 85, you know, and he's going to have. But the River Shore, of course, is one of my favorites. You know, since 1948 through 53, the Corps of Engineers has held those 34 miles of shoreline. The community keeps coming back and saying, oh, if it's turned over to the community, we're going to have wall-to-wall condos. Wait, that can't happen. I mean, it just can't happen. It's zone property. Most of it is already in park, and you don't easily take parkland out of that kind of a zoning and change it to high density of any kind. So, but the community, if it does what Boise, Idaho has done and convert the downtown area along the Boise River, I mean, it would be just a fantastic asset for the community. So I can't say enough about that.
You bet. Carl, any comments or thoughts about the?
Well, I'll just say, since my retirement, I have spent more time on the trails than I had spent before, and really have. I mean, you know, Gary and Brad Fisher and Doc were involved in developing a video, and that video has been used quite a bit and everything. But, you know, getting out there and seeing it firsthand, there really is a lot of potential there. And not necessarily for development, but just making it more friendly for people to recreate, enjoy the river and that sort of thing. And so, you know, if you look up and down the river, there are parcels that have river views that are vacant, that have not developed. And, you know, and so this idea that we're going to have wall-to-wall condos is just, I think, just an excuse not to have change, and not to change the ownership. I think the other thing we have to recognize is, even if the land is transferred, it's going to cost a lot of money to improve those spaces. And so, you know, it's not going to happen overnight.
No, that's a great point. And I think, Gary, you know, comparison to Boise is a good one, in that, you know, what I think what we all want to do is continue the really great placemaking that's taken place here in the Tri-Cities. You know, I being a new Tri-Citian, my exposure to Tri-Cities in the past was just driving through town, right? Going from Spokane to Portland, or even from North Idaho to Southern Idaho, because it's faster to go through the Tri-Cities than it is to go down 95. But I'm just blown away at you know, the amenities. And I think a lot of that growth in that sector, which, you know, nearshore reconveyance, I think could just accelerate that and make the Tri-Cities even a more unique place that both people want to come visit and people want to live. You know, I think that's always been part of, you know, TRIDEC's role, is that making sure that all of our employers across the spectrum have access to a great workforce, and, you know, making it Tri-Cities an even better place to live is a big part of that. I think that nearshore reconveyance would be a great step towards building even cooler things that people want to go do, for sure.
You know, except for the smoke, you could say that the Tri-Cities is wonderfully exempt from hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and on and on and on. I mean, it's a place that you would like to grow a family, retire, and feel free to walk along the Columbia River. I mean, it's a pleasant community. You know, so other than the smoke today.
I will say that the smoke is here. I mean, it's hazy in the Midwest right now because of the western wildfires, and the sunrises and sunsets red because of that smoke. It's nothing like what's going on in the Tri-Cities, but it is hazy here.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think again, you know, the weather here is good, and I am just blown away by irrigation. Like, you know, like coming out of dryland wheat country or timber country, it's amazing to see what you can grow around here with a little bit of water. And I think that's obviously been part of our success in the past, and the agrarian base that we've got. It's just an amazing place to grow things. I was talking to, you know, one of our board members from Lamb Weston the other day, and he told me, he said, hey, look, this is the best place in the world to grow potatoes and many, many other crops. Like, you can't get the growing cycles that you do here. So
just add water.
That's
just
right.
Add water.
That's right.
Go.
Well, we're down to about 10 minutes, and I think this has been a really great conversation. It's been really easy for me because you guys have been carrying the show today. But I'll just open it up and see what you guys want to talk about. I know, Gary, you talked about maybe when you were stationed in the Army, like Camp Hanford, and I've heard stories about it. So I'd kind of really like to hear your Camp Hanford story and how that all came about.
But actually, in deference, I could let Carl Adrian just do, he knows every one of my stories.
He's heard those stories so many times I can tell them. Ask him if there were ever alligators out on the site.
See, that's the alligator story.
Okay.
So I was assigned here very briefly with the Army on top of Rattlesnake Mountain, 1959, January. And 3 times a day, you had to load in the back of a 2.5-ton truck with an 18-year-old driver and drive down that mountain. And I knew I was going to die. So I applied for relocation any place, and I got sent to Korea for a couple of years. So I didn't think I'd ever come back to the Tri-Cities. You know, of course, I didn't see much of the Tri-Cities from up on top of that mountain.
Upper
But
Rattlesnake.
that's, yeah.
And were there, I mean, back in that era, kind of before intercontinental ballistic missiles, the U.S. had a pretty extensive air defense missile system. Is that,
Well,
was
they
that,
had a Nike Ajax. Well, early on, they had anti-aircraft, you know, the
yeah, guns?
kind, but it was, there were 4 batteries, Nike Ajax missiles surrounding the site. Let me just point out, when the site was fully operational with 9 operating reactors producing during the Cold War, all 9 reactors producing, there were about 8,000 people out here. And the annual budget was somewhere under $1 billion, close to $800 million.
Wow.
When it was decided that N reactor was the last one to operate and they shut it down, everybody said this place was going to dry up and blow away. This was before whoops. I mean, this was, they said it's going to dry up and blow away because it's just going to be, the phrase, suck, muck, and truck, and anybody can do it. You know, well, here we are, how many ever years later, 25, 30 years later, and the budget, rather than 800 million, is closer to 3 billion, and the workforce has gone from 8,000 to something over 14,000. I mean, so, but Carl Adrian's right. Everybody's become complacent. Well, those federal dollars just keep coming. I will tell you, it's unsustainable. I mean, the federal budget cannot keep spending $2, $3, $4, $5 billion a year here. They just can't do it.
So Carl, rather than, I'd be curious, what do you think TRIDEC looks like and the Tri-Cities look like post-COVID?
So, you know, we talked a lot about the federal role and the federal programs. You know, I think because those dollars have continued to flow, you know, even as contractors weren't on the site because of federal legislation in the CARES Act, you know, their folks were still paid for working remotely. And I think that our economy, because of that, has a quicker recovery than a lot of other economies, because a big part of that base is still there. And, you know, ag wasn't shut down, essential industries. So I think that, you know, the recovery for our economy is going to come back really quickly. I'm amazed, you know, we're deep into a, you know, new attraction project that's, I'll just say, is in food processing, that I think we got a pretty good shot at. So even during COVID, there are still food producers that are looking at Tri-Cities because of all the things that we've just talked about. The other thing that I'm really excited about, and I think that it's great because it taps into our heritage, it taps into the base of workforce that we've got, and that's new nuclear. You know, I mean, I think from a national lab perspective, you know, INL is kind of the nuclear research lab, but we've got opportunities because of some of that Hanford legacy, because of, you know, potentially some infrastructure that still exists, because of you know, the workforce that's really ready to go around nuclear power, because of Energy Northwest, because of, you know, all these other things. I think we're well positioned for new nuclear opportunities. You know, the small modular reactors, micro modular reactors, fuels production. And it sounds kind of crazy and you're like, what's that guy talking about? But space nuclear, I think, is a huge, huge opportunity. So, you know, I think the things, yeah, I think Carl, the things that you worked so hard on and had so many successes, we're going to continue to have successes in, you know, the food processing, logistics, you know, all of those really good jobs. And I think this new nuclear has such huge potential for us. And I think TRIDEC and the Tri-Cities are really positioned well to take advantage of some of those things.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Do you have any, well, I got you. You got any insights for me since we just had a couple days together and, you know, we haven't spent much time. So I look forward to COVID when we can go to lunch once in a while, but any words of wisdom?
I haven't thought a lot about it since I retired, actually.
That's good. That's the best kind of retirement, right?
Yeah.
Well, Gary, how about you? Everybody says like Gary's the best storyteller out there. I think you've shared some good ones with us, but
Like I say, Carl knows every one of my stories. So we've got about a minute left. I will tell the alligator story, just in difference for Carl.
Okay.
Okay. So there were 9 production reactors, and the last one on the downstream side was 100F. And so that's where they located aquatic biology, because they were studying the impact of returning all that water that run through the reactors to the Columbia River and seeing if there was an impact on the fish. And so some of the veterinarians at the time, too, ended up saying, you know, we really need to study the uptake of strontium-90 in bones or a thick-skinned animal. And so they talked to a man named Dr. Bill Bear, and they said, we really need to get some alligators, thick-skinned animals, and study them there at F reactor and see if they do uptake strontium-90 in, you know, their bones and in the skin. And so at the time, there's a little discrepancy in the story between me and Bill Bear, but my story is they bought 9 alligators, and these were about 14 to 16 inch long, small alligators. I mean, they were just young ones. And they put them in a pen in the Columbia River, and everything was going fine until there was a big storm. And the storm knocked the fence down, and all 9 of the alligators got loosed in the Columbia River. Well, everybody got excited because, I mean, this is all classified stuff. And they found 8 of the 9 alligators. I mean, the technicians and everybody, they searched everywhere. Well, a month or so later, a fisherman named Aaron was at Ringgold downstream, and he caught an alligator. Now, nobody would believe Aaron and his alligator, so he took it over to a taxidermist in Pasco and had it stuffed. Well, one of the technicians from 100F area was walking by the taxidermist shop, saw this alligator in the window. He just ran in, grabbed it, and ran out. Okay, so this was 1963. I didn't show up until 65. Okay, and so not long after I showed up, my boss, George Dalen, called me to his office one day and he says, Gary, we need to give Aaron his alligator back. And I'm going, what are you talking about? Anyway, George reaches down and brings out this stuffed alligator. It was mounted, you know, behind his desk, and he says, go find Aaron and give it back. So I did, we did. The difference between Bill Bear's story and mine is Bill Bear says there were more than 9 alligators. That's the alligator story. With that, we're right at time.
We are. This has been great. I do want to say we did get through Facebook. We did get a congressional staffer, a very senior one, that definitely supported Gary's statement about TRIDEC's role in appropriations and how much they appreciate the relationship. So you know, the relationships that the whole team's built over the years are still strong, and we're getting some feedback even while we're live here. So
Good to hear.
yeah, no, I want to thank both of you guys. You know, it's been great. I love my family, and I love being here in the Tri-Cities. We look forward to, you know, our next steps and you know, taking TRIDEC and our team and the community forward. But thank you both for your devotion to the community and for your service really to our community. And thanks for coming on Coffee with the Carls this morning.
Thanks for having us, Carl. And I want to give a shout out to Tracy and Ashley. They're the greatest.
No, they're doing a good job. All I got to do is talk. They take care of everything. It makes it really easy for me. Gary, thanks for coming on.
That's been the way it's been.
That's right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Yeah, we'll be back next Friday. Thanks both for your time. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.